Longtime voice of the Cougars, Paul James, passed away at his home Saturday at the age of 87. James did play-by-play on KSL radio for BYU football and basketball games starting in 1965 until 1996 in hoops and 2000 in football, with the final season and game coinciding with Lavelle Edwards' final season. Today, those two are back together again. And a man who is the young sideline reporter and eventually PJ's replacement, Greg Wrubell, the next in line as the voice of the Cougars, now joins us in studio. As we remember Paul James, it is an emotional day, Greg.
Yeah, and it happened Saturday night. And the first thing I wanted to know was, where was he and who was with him? And he'd apparently suffered some health setbacks very recently. Family was with him, and he was at home, which is where he wanted to be at that point. And so that was what I was most concerned about, that he had people around him that he loved. And yeah, it's just terribly sad. Believing what we believe, we can't stay too sad for too long, but it's just the natural thing you feel when you lose somebody from this earth life. And, he was somebody terribly special to me. And again, I only wish that I'd spent more time and more days in the last few years with him. I'd call him more or less regularly, once or twice a year, just to say, how's it going? But it had been a while. And just last week, I was at an event where somebody brought him to mind. And I said, I've got to give him a call. I didn't call him, and 2 days later. So, I personally feel terrible about that, because I had one last chance to connect with either him or his family, just last Thursday, and didn't take advantage of that opportunity. And it was always fun to chat with him. And I would always extend an invitation to him to come to the booth, just come hang out. And I said, people would love to hear from you, even if you'd put the headset on for 30 seconds and just said hello. If not, I always wanted him to call play. I said, I want you to come and, he said, no, that'll never, I'll never do it. That'll never happen. And I kept asking, but what a thrill it would have been for people to hear him again, because his voice was magical, right?
Oh.
I mean, I didn't, growing up in Canada, I didn't know anything of BYU or Paul James till I got down here, but I found out immediately what he meant to this community and to Cougar Nation. And when I got the chance to actually work on the same broadcast as him, it was one of those pinch me moments, like, whoa, he's the man. And I'm sharing the airwaves with the man. And as I shared on my tweets yesterday, everything I do is tied to what he did. Everything. There's not a thing I do in terms of game prep or the physical preparation of my spotting boards and my scripts that wasn't something I saw him do personally. And those were cherished times when we would go on the road, and I'd go into his hotel room on Friday night, and we'd game plan. We'd game plan the broadcast for the next day. And those were again, amazing times. And Mark Lyons was right there with me that whole time. And you'll have Mark on, I'm sure, at some point, too, to talk about his memories of Paul. But, yeah, it was just a time I'll never forget. Those 9 years we got to be together on the broadcast crew. And, yeah, just a special man.
We'll have Mark Lyons on tomorrow, as a matter of fact. Greg Wrubell with us as we remember the great Paul James, legendary broadcaster. I had a couple of friends that work at the national level, one at the Major League Baseball Network and another that works closely with the Dodgers, and they said, hey, I keep seeing stuff pop up in my timeline about this Paul James guy. What's his deal? And I said, okay, you as people who can appreciate baseball commentary and as a Dodger fan understand what Vin Scully means, right? It would be like if the great Vin Scully had passed away. And immediately they said, wow. Okay, yeah. we had no idea. But it's hard to really put into words what he means, just to hear his voice, what that means to BYU fans.
Yeah, like Vin Scully, Paul had a kind of a musical, lyrical quality to his delivery, and like Vin Scully, Paul emerged at a time when radio was still king in a lot of ways, and then people grew up with him as the voice of their fandom, and back then, every game wasn't on TV, and your ability to enjoy Cougar sports was often directly tied to your ability to get Paul's voice over your transistor radio or car radio, wherever you may be. And thanks to KSL's great signal, you often heard of the tales of people who would, get their car to the nearest, hilltop or overpass to make sure they could get a clear signal just to hear Paul call the games. And those kinds of memories are flooding through social media the last couple of days. People who literally, that's how they enjoyed Cougar sports for so many years. And again, I was honored to be able to work on his crew for 9 years. And so I'd have the headset on, I'd be on the sidelines, and I got to hear him, do what I thought was almost impossible to do, which was just memorize all those names and numbers and transmit the action immediately and instantaneously in a way that was cohesive and compelling and again, like I said, kind of musical almost, and thought, man, he's just the best. How does he do it? How could he, and never thought I'd find myself in that kind of position, because I didn't think I'd have the ability to do what he does. And I'm only just filling shoes. There's one voice of the Cougars, and that was Paul, for so many years. And it's impossible to do what he did exactly the way he did it.
A lot of people know him as the voice of the Cougars, but he was much more than that as well. He was a KSL anchor forever.
He was also the voice of the Utes.
North,
he was the voice of the Utes before he was the voice of the
yeah. Utah grad.
I can't imagine doing both, by the way, just so you know.
He was a gardener. He was a painter. I'll share
played the piano, and
I'll share an experience coming up where I interviewed him at his house. But he was really witty, like really smart. Kind of like to rib people and have
world
fun.
traveler, Renaissance man. I mean, he really was a man of varied interests and varied skills. Again, I'm so limited in what I'm able to do in my life compared to Paul. I mean, Paul had so many abilities, and once he retired from his nightly sports anchor job and focused solely on the play-by-play, he was able to explore so many of those other. He was a high caliber level bridge player as well. I mean, he did so many interesting and fun things. And you go to his house, and it was just it was a menagerie of different types of paintings and sculptures and interesting furniture, and then you go into his gardens, and they were just massive, and he was just a really interesting guy, and lived such a really diverse and again rich life.
And you talk about what he meant to KSL, and I've had conversations with Steve Cyphers and Craig Bolerjack and even Jim Nance, and they all talk about the great Paul James. They all went through KSL and have had their incredible careers, but they all reference what Paul James did for KSL. Pretty cool.
Yeah, no, he was one of a kind and a giant in this community, and truly somebody that Cougar Nation can treasure and cherish and have really fond memories of. And again, it's just a very a melancholy time right now, and but yet ultimately it's a happiness that I'm left with when I think about Paul and his life and what he meant to me and so many others in Cougar Nation, but particularly from a personal standpoint. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you guys without him. That's just simply that. Nothing I'm doing now could have happened without Paul and his training and his tutelage and his mentorship and his friendship. And so I owe it all to him.
Greg Wrubell on the legendary voice of the Cougars, Paul James. Coming up next, Blaine Fowler's going to join us. Thank you, Greg, for the time, of course. But first, let's enjoy the voice of Paul James as he calls three of the most iconic moments in BYU sports history.
Notre Dame putting full court pressure in backcourt with 3 men in backcourt. The freshman Timo Saralainen will inbound the pass. He will get it into Ainge. Paxson is on Ainge. Ainge still in backcourt, dribbling behind his back. Ainge comes down, goes all the way in, puts it in! BYU wins! The ball at the 14-yard line. 31 seconds to go. It is 1st and 10, BYU. Hamilton and Stinnett in the backfield. The give is to Stinnett. A pass back to Steve Young. Young at the 20, the 10, the 5. Touchdown! A trick play. It is 3rd down and 3 at the 13. Bosco again, back to pass. Stands in the pocket. He's in trouble. A flag goes down. Bosco throws into the end zone. Touchdown to Kelly Smith, but there's a flag down. Kelly Smith caught a TD pass, but there's a flag down on the far side of the field. It is being rolled, a touchdown, Kelly Smith.